Thank you, Pedro, for the warm introduction. Can you hear me well? Yes. Perfect. Okay. Okay. So I couldn't be more excited to be here this morning on behalf of the Center for Binational Institutions. I have to say that we are part of the U.S.-Mexico Foundation family. You might have already seen me running around the place yesterday at the inauguration, and it's been really exciting to see the combining power that we've had, and to see that we have many colleagues and friends that are here to discuss specifically the role of institutions in advancing agendas. Yesterday at the inauguration, the speakers were mentioning the many challenges that we're facing as a region: COVID, post-pandemic recovery, supply chains. They also mentioned this focus that we're having on talent and digitization. And what I think it's really unique about the conversation that we're about to have is that we get to explore what is the role of institutions specifically into advancing these agendas. What I also think is different and special about our conversation is that we have representatives from the different sectors. We have civil society, we have an international, actually a binational organization, we have the private sector, and the academia. So, with that being said, and I'd like to remark also that as an organization, we were only created last year in the midst of the pandemic, specifically with a mission to advance the understanding and the study of binational institutions. So with that being said, Dina, I would like to start with you. You've been a lifelong champion of institutions, and I'd love to learn what are some of what can we learn from the experience of the American Jewish Committee about institutional relationship building to advance the North American way?
Thank you so much, Cristina, and thank you so much to the U.S.-Mexico Foundation and to its Center for Binational Institutions. I would like to thank Enrique Perret, a longtime friend and partner of the American Jewish Committee, with whom we had the pleasure to travel to Mexico several years ago in a delegation made up of Mexican Americans and U.S. Jewish leaders to impact the well-being and a positive agenda between both countries. So very grateful to be here. And I'm sure you are wondering, why is an organization like the American Jewish Committee, which is not a traditional, you wouldn't think about an organization like ours being an interlocutor in this type of conversation, why am I here? And I hope that as I articulate the work that AJC has done in fostering stronger ties between Mexico and the United States, you'll understand better the reason I'm here. I represent an organization that was founded in 1906 in New York. It's the oldest human relations organization, Jewish and non-Jewish, in the country, in the United States. And today we have a domestic and global reach. We have 24 offices in the United States. We have 14 offices around the world. Our mandate is both particular and universal. On one hand, we work to enhance and ensure the well-being of Jewish communities wherever they are. But at the same time, we work to strengthen the democratic fabric of societies and ensure that all minorities have the rights are being respected and upheld. At the same time, my institute, I head an institute within HAC, which is called the Belfer Institute for Latino and Latin American Affairs, which is unique not only in the Jewish world, but I would say even beyond the Jewish world. We work to connect all the different layers of the Latino universe writ large. So we work in the United States to foster political alliances between the U.S., Jewish and Latino communities, including the Mexican-American community. We work at the hemispheric level, fostering stronger ties between the United States and among the different nations of the Americas. We work also transatlantically. Spain and Portugal are also part of our portfolio, and we work transnationally and globally. So we try to connect all these different layers and unleash synergies among all of them. My personal story has a lot to do with the conversation today and the American way. I'm a Mexican native. I was born in Mexico City, at Chilanga. Second generation born here. My mother was first generation born here. My father was an American citizen who immigrated to Mexico. So I was a Mexican American. I've been a Mexican American since I was born. Both professionally and personally, I have been very much involved in, I've been a presence on both sides of the border, working in that sense, working with the Jewish community in Mexico, working with the Jewish community in the United States, and working with the Mexican American community back in the United States. The concept of diaspora is very important here, and I think that this is a very important connector. We talk about immigration, we're talking about immigration. Immigration is today, without a doubt, one of the top issues and top challenges throughout the world. You know, my own story and the story of many of us has to do with the immigration story, but also the many identities and the many homelands that, you know, are now part of our own story, and homelands that we can impact, which is what we're trying to do. You know, I have different homelands. Mexico is my native homeland. Israel is my ancestral homeland, and of course the United States is now my current homeland. So I think that, you know, this transnational identity is more and more let's say the common currency for many of us. With Mexico, AJC has been working for many decades. We had an office here at some point, we work to foster diplomatic and political connections. And today we engage the Mexican government, the American government, civil society, the Mexican Jewish community, the American Jewish community, to advocate on issues which are important to both nations and to both communities, whether it be immigration reform, whether it be disinformation, toxic narratives that we're seeing more and more, unfortunately, you know, in the United States and elsewhere, whether it be foreign policy or diaspora homeland ties. This is something very important. So organizations like AJC help to preserve the long-term memory, institutional memory, and goals of the relationship, of the binational relationship. Conflicts and differences are inevitable, and they will always be there. But the fact that we focus on the positive helps provide impetus towards the future, and that's what organizations like AJC are doing.
Thank you, Dina. I'd like to continue with Guillermo specifically. We'll get a moment to discuss specifically on how these organizations have concrete examples on how they advance the strengthening of bilateral institutions. However, when last year I met Guillermo, we were fascinated from the research he had been doing from the past years in academia around the data analysis about the specific categories that you had found on the study of institutions. Can you share a little bit more about that, please?
You hear me? Yeah, and thank you so much for the invitation to the foundation, to everybody here. It's a pleasure to be with friends and known faces. I'm really honored and privileged to have been invited. Well, the research that I've been doing at Texas A&M basically focuses on binational institutions, primarily at the state, municipal, and federal level. Let me frame it this way. If the US-Mexico relationship was to be a human body, you have the head of the states, right? The presidents, the head of the ministries, State Department, they are the heads of the organizations of the government. Then you have the bones of the body, which are usually the treaties, international treaties, like we've been talking about the USMCA, and the importance of that kind of legal instruments. But the instruments that I'm going to be talking about today are actually the veins that help the relationship to move forward. So from time to time, the head might be paralyzed because politics happens, right? From time to time, the bones might be having issues with moving, maybe they have ostracized. But the veins are the real things that actually get things done in everyday bureaucratic processes, right? And so what motivated me to study these kind of institutions? And I'm happy to talk about the methodology in the Q&A or later on. But this basically was motivated thanks to reporters, and I see a couple of good friends back there, Salvador Camarena and others, that have helped also to tell us stories about what is actually happening. So you might recall a couple of years ago when President Trump threatened twice, this is the second time, he threatened to impose 5% tariffs on all Mexican goods if Mexico didn't stop immigrants from coming in to Mexico. You remember that? Right, so it was a big scandal. And down here, a couple of blocks ago from us, the Cancilleria flew to Washington and tried to convince President Trump not to do it. And they gave a press conference. There was a press conference saying, we reached an agreement, we're done, Mexico is going to start collaborating. And then Trump came out with a little piece of paper, remember? Saying, I have a secret deal. A secret deal. And I'm not going to tell you what a secret deal is. And thanks to reporters, they snapped a picture, right? And that picture was about an MOU. That's a mutual understanding agreement, right? Signed between the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs, at that time was Alejandro Celorio, and another deputy on the State Department. And involved a certain number of actions that Mexico was supposed to take. So I started wondering, if this is such an important issue, right? I mean, this is really stopping the President Trump from imposing tariffs. How many of these instruments are out there? How many other secret instruments are there that we don't know about? So through Freedom of Information Act and Proceso de Transparencia in Mexico, I started soliciting all the MOUs that have been signed between Mexico and the United States from 2000 to 2021. So that's basically 21 years of US-Mexico relationship. And I found out that there are 1,900 MOUs and letters of intent signed between Mexico and the United States. A vast majority of them are signed between consulates, officers, and state agencies in the United States, but also with federal US agencies. But also we have a good number, close to 500 to 400, and I'm happy to tell you more about the details. I have numbers for everyone. So they have to do with federal level. So these are many agencies like the Procuraduría signing something with State Department or with ICE or with CBP, or like Cancilleria, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, signing also something with state authorities like California or Texas. And so you have different levels of interactions, right? And many of these, what do they talk about? From very simple things such as, how are we going to coordinate the deportees that are going to cross the border? Right? At what time are CBPs going to deliver those deportees to Mexico, and how are they going to be processed? Two very important things. And you can ask General Cienfuegos if the MOUs are important or not. Because the operation of the DEA in Mexico that produced all the intelligence that eventually was used in the US to stop General Cienfuegos was through an MOU. And that same MOU was used by the Mexican government to bring Cienfuegos back, because you didn't comply with the MOU. So I'm a lawyer, as a training, people say, MOUs are not binding, they're not important, they're quote unquote soft law. And I say, well, ask Cienfuegos if they are soft, because they clearly have some teeth into it. And they're generating behavior in the administration, they're generating behavior in the institutions that actually are aligning the opportunity for them. And what I love about the MOUs is that really, me as an academic, I see law and many of these international institutions as an opportunity to have dialogues and conversations. So as opposed to seeing the rules as, enforcing commitments, I see them more as a platform for dialogue, a platform to get things done, to homologize standards. So we have MOUs that have to do with ASEA working with the Department of Interior to develop the same regulations for offshore drilling, for example. And those have clear impacts on business people, right? Those have clear impacts on the way we interact every day. And again, these are regardless of the politics, right? You can have different presidents. And actually, one of the interesting things that we find is that when there's a change of administration in Mexico, if you map them down, there's an increase on the signing of these agreements. Right? So it shows you that bureaucrats are thinking things might change, so we want to set down the rules for future administrations when they come along, and that starts a dialogue, right? We have this agreement signed with you that we want to continue. So you have those different spikes coming in and out, and again, in the Q&A, I'm happy to show how different administrations have different impacts, but again, that is the idea. So these are really important instruments. These are institutions that help us coordinate policies, to allow us to work with state and federal agencies, and there's an important story to tell about them.
And I think we've been discussing for the past year what to do with this information. And we partnered with Guillermo. We invited him as a senior fellow to the Center for Binational Institutions to create a data visualization tool that can help us bring this information to the public in a valuable way. Of course, there will be like the raw data so that press can use it however it see fits and the different sectors. But we believe there's a value for decision makers to see what's happening in terms of patterns in the data throughout the past 20 years. And well, you were discussing just minutes ago specifically about these numbers, about these treaties, about these memorandums of understanding. But we have here a very specific example of a binational organization. So Calixto, I would love to ask you, what is the North American Development Bank? Why is it a unique binational institution?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to the U.S.-Mexico Foundation. Thank you to Enrique Perret, and particularly to you, Cristina, for organizing this panel. And I think Gina and Guillermo just gave a good intro of why is it important. I mean, it's important to have the people, it's important to have the institutional structure. And one of those, as you were saying, I mean, NAFTA is that, even though there are MOUs, but NAFTA is a treaty, or the USMCA now, it's a treaty. And in the same sense, the North American Development Bank is a treaty. It's an agreement between both governments that it has to be ratified by Congress in the US and by the Senate in Mexico. So it gives us a very high level, let's say, in our organization, and it also it's one of the, I must say, few truly binational and where the US and Mexico have the equal shares. You know, there's no one bigger side than the other, and the way we are structured is actually to fund and to finance environmental infrastructure projects. We have a very clear mandate, very specific one, and that's also being very important for the Development Bank, because it's a mandate that it's important, it's palatable for both countries at all times. And so far the bank has developed after 20-some years, because it was founded in 1994, at the same time as NAFTA, but it's a separate agreement. And that gives us a unique perspective, and it's an institution that we have tried to show that we can have the let's say, the American way, working Mexico and the US, and showing that we can work together, and we don't have like this difference in cultures. There are some, of course, but we work for the better of the border region.
Thank you very much, Calixto. And moving from a binational institution specifically into border dynamics, Gaston, you've lived it from your own experience. What is the role of institutions specifically in cross-border dynamics and across sectors?
Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to share the panel with some good friends and people I respect and colleagues. To your question, I think the role of binational institutions understood as with their civic and business elements or components that are different from binational institutions that are only government operated, I think they have a key role. And using Guillermo's example of the circulatory process within our bodies, these institutions, these binational border institutions are, I believe, indispensable, but also insufficient. They're good because they work from the ground up. It's civic and business assets. They're good because they know the local arena, the local problems. They're good because they know these problems that they know better, I guess, in general terms, foster better solutions. So the challenge, or one of the challenges, is the linkage with the federal governments, with the state governments, with the city governments. So that's always a challenge, because we generally have a misalignment between our governments. We have misalignments between the governments between themselves. So this creates more of a challenge or more of an obstacle for these binational institutions to be more productive and to work. But they also serve as a buffer when things are not going well in government. Because these binational institutions, having a civic and a business component, generally outlast the terms of governments. So they have a mid and long-term range that foster not only personal relationships, but more of an institutional framework that I think is important. So they're also key in strategic issues. Border, you have safety, security, immigration, water, environment, competitiveness, just to name a few. So if they're so good and they're so important and they're so needed, why don't we have enough? Or why is it that the ones that we have would seem that they're not doing what they should be doing or what we would like them to do? And I think some of the reasons is institutions, regardless of the fact that they're private or public, have inherent limitations. One is, what is their legal structure, their legal framework? And two, they're just as good as the people who run them. And the people might be very well and capable and good or not so good. So that's a constant challenge for institutions. But also an additional challenge, and I think a recent one, is they are being besieged in both our countries, in general terms, by ignorance or by bad faith, or by a vision that institutions have nothing to do with governing, especially if they are civic institutions from civil society. So that's an added challenge that we're facing. So there's kind of a paradox. Today we find that there is a greater need for these institutions because there is a greater need for integration in North America, for the reasons that we've always had them. But additionally, now for strategic and safety reasons, considering China and Russia and what's happening in the world, there are many issues that are not only economic, but now are safety related. So we have a strong theme in terms of ally shoring. Mm-hmm. So this is a great opportunity and a great challenge. But at the same time, we're not aligned in terms of institutions, and we're not aligned in terms of how good and how important this relationship between Canada, the US, and Mexico is. So what can we do about it? I'd say two things, many things, but specifically two. If anybody here has a specific theme or a matter or a subject that they're interested, that they work in, your area of opportunity, try to identify with Guillermo. I'm taking the liberty of sending him to you because he has an inventory of these institutions. And these institutions work in different themes or matters or issues. And you should identify the institutions that work in your issues and areas of interest. And if I may take the liberty of saying, you should see how you can help this institution, how you can identify your strategic allies in terms of how can we identify them and work with them and make them stronger. And if you don't want to participate in a current institution, you can always create your own. We need more. So I would leave it there for a matter of time.
Yeah, thank you, Gaston. I think you mentioned two critical points. One of them is that when we're trying to focus the conversation from people to institutions, but then we forget that who is behind institutions are people. So we have that tension. And then that when we are analyzing and studying institutions, we usually tend to focus on government institutions. For example, with the research that Guillermo is doing, is mostly focused on government data. But I think there's a very, very important role for civic institutions. And I'd like to ask you, Dina, understanding that you've had an important role in the preserving of this institutional memory, Could you please share an example of how an anecdote, a project, how a civic institution look like in practice?
Thank you, Cristina. Of course. I mean, one of the things, I mean, there's several projects that we've been working on and we continue to work on. But one of the ones that really, you know, continues to excite me and continues to remind me, you know, of how interconnected we are and the impact that we can have. In 2016, during the presidential elections in the United States, on the campaign trail, I don't have to remind you how Mexico was being bashed. Mexican Americans were being bashed, Latinos were being bashed, and AJC, which as I mentioned to you, is a good friend of Mexico and understands, of course, the strategic importance of the US-Mexico relationship, but also is very much concerned about attacks against our partners in the Latino community and the Mexican American community, decided to act. I have to tell you, we're a nonpartisan organization. That is one of the strengths of our organization. We are a centrist, nonpartisan organization that really has credibility on both sides of the aisle. But this time we decided that we had to act on principle. So what we did is, working with the Mexican government and with the Mexican embassy, with our partners from the Jewish community in Mexico, and also with the Mexican American community, we convened a very important group during our annual conference, which is called Global Forum, where we bring about 3,000 leaders from all over the world, not only from Jewish communities. We have opinion leaders and we have thought leaders, political leaders from all over the world. We decided to bring the foreign minister of Mexico, who came accompanied by the 50 consul generals of Mexico, which came accompanied by 50 Mexican American leaders from all over the country, and also 50 leaders of the Mexican Jewish community. They all gathered in Washington, they all gathered during our conference, and we all, you know, spoke out against what we were hearing on the campaign trail, saying, you know, hands off Mexico, you know, you are going to be affecting, you know, a historical, strategic relationship. This is not the way to act. It was a very, very important event. We were remembering, you were there, of course, and we were remembering, you know, that consul generals still, you know, the consuls in many places still remember that, I would say, that display of allyship, of strength, of advocacy. It was very, very important. And another one, and then I'll stop there, political empowerment. We know that our Mexican American, the Mexican American community has been growing by leaps and bounds, politically, economically, etc. But, you know, still we have a long way to go. And now I'm speaking, you know, with my hat, Mexican Jewish, you know, Mexican American, but we have a long way to go. So how can we help the Mexican American community gain the political clout that it deserves by not only by its numbers, you know, 38 million Mexicans, which is an incredible number, but also given its, you know, its growth and its economic clout, etc. So we decided to create these spaces. It has been going on maybe for 15 years or more already. These workshops where we bring together leaders from the Mexican American communities and leaders of the US Jewish community. And the idea is to share the models that the US Jewish community, how has the US Jewish community advanced, you know, in the last 100 years or more that it has been present in the US. 6 million Jews, very, very tiny minority, but it punches above its weight politically. So what is the secret? You know, what is the secret? And the secret, you know, the secret is really being part of the democratic process and coalition building, other issues which are like basic to the American democratic system. And it has been really an incredible experience. There's a lot of alumni of these workshops that have now become much more active and much more knowledgeable of how to engage in the American political system and make a difference. Of course, there's a long way to go, But these are two examples, concrete examples of how we have, impacted, let's say, the...
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that your model has served as an inspiration for some of the programming that the U.S.-Mexico Foundation has. For example, the U.S.-Mexico 360 initiative, which is a public diplomacy effort, and we were just learning yesterday that more than 500 delegates have traveled from the United States to Mexico to learn more and to build ties and to build capacity and to become the next generation of North American leaders. So definitely the work that the civil society is doing at this level is critical. Guillermo, we already have a point of departure with the database. It's showing a lot of important information for the study of institutions, but something that we've also discussed is how difficult it has been to gather the data. So what are your thoughts on and recommendations on how to keep this institutional memory, but also how to open it so that every sector can access this information without having to go through a transparencia request?
So that is, as a researcher, that is always the biggest challenge, right? There's always changes in the administration, and then when you file freedom of information request and even to transparencia, it would all depend on who is in power at that time and how open they are to disclose some of the information. When it comes to U.S.-Mexico relationships, it's easy for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is supposed to centralize all this information and say it might have an impact on U.S.-Mexico relations, and that's why they are not going to disclose it. So we've seen a steep decline on the things that we've been getting back, I would say, in the last 2-3 years, unfortunately. So that might have two explanations. On one, they're classifying more information. Secondly, we can see also a decline on governmental relationships, because everything now, because of the pandemic, also had an impact. But also, let's face it, the Cancillería has also concentrated more and more the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and we see less secretarias visiting other secretarias, right, going back and forth as before. I think things are starting to get better now, especially after the pandemic started. We see more Americans coming more here than Mexicans going there, but still, that's a good sign. The challenge is, of course, eventually also to disclose how effective the agreements are, because right now the database is basically showing us there are agreements, they are signing them, they are important because of the examples that I show. They are important because, and there's another anecdote there. You remember also the first time actually that Trump threatened to close the border, right? President Peña Nieto came to the national television and said, I'm ordering all the secretarias of the federal government to let me know the key collaboration mechanisms between Mexico and the United States, because I'm going to show President Trump how important our relationship is and how deep it is. And it's not only about migration. Unfortunately, President Peña Nieto, a couple of months later, they never disclosed that information, but I received the information through the Freedom of Information Act. And we see there that 40% of the key collaboration mechanisms that the Secretaría showed are all MOUs. Only 6% are treaties, right? And the rest are binational groups and binational commissions where they sit down and work things out. So it shows you the complexity of the relationship. Again, going not only to the treaties and the actual documents, this human interaction, being able to go and sit with your counterparty and try to figure things out, regardless of what is happening in Los Pinos or what's happening in the White House, is so important for the relationship. So getting all that information out, I think it shows us that, again, there are things that we can do. We can work together. There are also some of these MOUs are signed with civil society, with state universities and institutions. That also allows us to, again, start a dialogue. Because ultimately, you think about it, why do we sign contracts? Why do we sign treaties? It's not because we want to litigate them, although maybe lawyers, that's what they want to do. We sign agreements because we want to really crystallize a relationship, right? We want to show this is serious. This is serious, and we want to show that we're going to set the rules of the why, and the why we're getting together, and the rules of the why, how this relationship is going to take place, right? So I see these agreements as an opportunity to, again, engage in that sort of a dialogue. Down the line, I wish these things would be disclosed more openly, right? We're talking to the Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores, who is the institution in Mexico. They're supposed to centralize them. Funny enough, we have better laws of transparency than the US in this issue. On the US side, State Department, they don't publicize them if they think they're not binding. So the State Department, they don't know about them, right? When I've talked to Ambassador Landau and some former ambassadors, they're fascinated about all these data, but like not even the ambassadors know that everything that is going on, right? Think about you're the head of the state and all these veins are taking place and they're circulating stuff and you don't have no idea. So I think there's interest on both sides of the border to publicize it. So I'm very grateful to the Center for Binational Institutions and the Fundación for providing an opportunity and a platform to make this public, because this is your information. This is not my information. This is everybody's information, right? And everybody should benefit from having an idea of what is happening.
And I think what's really interesting is that most of the conversation is focused, as you just said, on data from the Mexican side. So where's the information and who's centralizing it in the United States? So this is a huge area of opportunity for further study, for homologization, harmonization, of the databases, because if we don't have the evidence, as the saying goes, we cannot improve what we cannot measure. So this information is critical to know how to move forward in terms of binational institutions.
And if I may add, just to close now that I'm excited about this, this panel, what it shows you, and the conversation that started yesterday, is that regardless of what's happening at the heads of a state, it is up to different stakeholders at different layers to go out publicly and saying, this is an important relationship, right? This is what you are threatening every time you come out in the media to win cheap political points. Right? There are more things that unite us than the ones that divide us, right? Civil society, business, banks, institutions, bureaucracies working together. But we, for many years, we were silent about these things, right? They were just operating. It wasn't until the last 4 or 5 years that we've actually been more open. So these type of forums and this opportunity provided by the foundation, I think that's why it's so important, because we really have to be out there and showing what they're putting in danger every time they're trying to score cheap political points.
Thank you, Guillermo. And Calixto, moving in a future agenda, what are the main challenges of the North American Development Bank is facing, and how are you advancing the North American way?
I think, as Gaston was saying, sometimes it's that the mandate is not so big, and some other times it's also that it's not well known. The needs of the border are immense, and especially in the areas of the bank, which is environment, and with environment we have a broad definition of it, and the board has expanded the reach of our mandate in terms of that we're focusing more on sustainable development of the border. So right now we can work on projects that provide water, that's one thing, that provide clean water, and that goes from all the water cycle, clean air, renewable energy. And now we're working in border crossings and in sustainable industrial parks and sustainable chains of production and the production of green products, let's say, solar panels on that. And we are in the process of developing a pipeline. We need, the challenge is that we need to involve more people with us. We are just one tip of the thing. But the good thing about the bank, it's that we have been able to be established now, that we're known in the border, that we're known as being a good interlocutor, both sides of the border. And some things like the water issue, and you living in Tijuana, you know about it. There's always a problem from the flows that go from Tijuana to the San Diego and Imperial Beach. And that creates a big issue. It's a very important international topic. And that's one with the water, but that's something that's happening there, but it will happen in Nuevo Laredo, and Nogales, Naco, Reynosa, FAR. Everywhere in the border there are problems that could mean those flows going. And we're there to work with it, and there's an institutional component that it's helping us. And as you say, as I was saying, I mean, the mandate's so good that we have in our board 3 top-level secretariats or ministers, which is State, Treasury, and the head of the EPA. And the same in Mexico, SRE, and bueno, Relaciones Exteriores, Hacienda, y Semarnat. So it's a forum where they have to meet for a specific purpose, which is the bank. And that allows for this interchange and communication of the institution. And that's, I think, one of the biggest values of the bank, and the challenge to keep it and not getting into any political side, let's say, but work towards given results in the border.
I think what's really interesting is learning from this evolution, how it was created in a context of NAFTA and how it's evolving to meet the needs of the century, but also to align with the SDGs agenda, for example, with the sustainable development revolution. So it's interesting to learn from this project. I hope that we have throughout the day more time to learn specifically about the kinds of projects you're doing at the border level, but thank you for these remarks. And to close with you, Gaston, I'd like to ask you, Coppel is one of our sponsors of the Center for Binational Institutions, sponsors together with Intuit. And I'd like to ask, why is it important from the private sector to support such initiatives and to promote cross-sector collaborations, building on the message that you were sharing before?
Well, it creates a more competitive region. In Coppel, we believe much in the value of being a good neighbor in the communities that we serve, but also a good neighbor with our countries to the south and to the north. It's a great opportunity to try to foster better public policies. We think also it creates a buffer or an insulation between the cracks that are created sometimes between governments. It's between the asymmetries or non-alignments. It fills those voids, I think, in a very positive way, and it creates value along the border. It creates opportunity. It creates a more competitive region that hopefully will translate into a better quality of life for the people that live in our shared regions. And I'd like to give 2 examples in San Diego of things that went well. One would be, if you are familiar with the Sentry card or the Global card, if I may ask who here has a Global or Sentry card? This was fostered in San Diego 25 years ago by the San Diego Dialogue, an institution that fostered the participation of civic, business, and government entities that were thinking, how can we fix the border? I think you can never fix the border, but how can make it more sustainable or more livable in terms of mobility? And this more mobility will mean a more competitive region. So this fostered greater mobility. Also, it's fostered greater investment in infrastructure. Calixto was saying there's going to be a new border crossing in the San Diego-Tijuana area, and the thing is that a new border crossing takes at least 10 years from when it's conceived to ultimately when it's opened, if you're lucky. The other would be the Smart Border Coalition that works in also these mobility issues in San Diego. The other would be the CBI. Coppel is very interested, and we're partnered with Intuit in creating CBI so that it could be a recipient or identify the inventory of institutions that work along the border. So that's why we're very enthused about this. There are tremendous challenges. And I think also we have to recognize that the Biden administration is working to rebuild or re-strengthen the institutions that were weakened in the Trump administration. We still have to do our share on our side in terms of building and fostering and strengthening more of these binational institutions.
Thank you, Gaston. Your support, your institutional support, has been critical for the advancement of the agenda of the Center for Binational Institutions. And to close, I would just like to ask you quickly, if you could share with the audience a short thought, a sentence on what would they like to take away from this session. We like to say that institutions not only matter, but they work to provide stability and predictability to the relationship. So just in one line, what's the main idea that you would like the audience to take with them from this conversation? And we can maybe start all the way around with Gaston.
But first thing that came to mind was network. I thought I knew about binational institutions, but there's plenty of institutions that I don't know about. Plenty of people that I don't know about that are very important to our subject matter. So even if you're involved, you can always learn more and identify people that are in the same area of interest that you are, and you can build on those relationships to build strategic alliances.
Definitely. Guillermo?
I'm going to run with the analogy that I started with. I think there is something that I want you to take from this dialogue, is that there is something more than the heads of a state, right? This relationship is something more than whatever is happening at the Cancilleria level, at the State Department level. Right? This relationship has to do with the bones, the treaties that are surrounding the relationship, the veins, all these agreements between different levels of government and local municipal authorities working together to solve water issues at the border and the like, but also the muscles. Now we're adding the muscles, the network, the business community, right? The societies that work together and trying to come up with deals and work things out. So again, this is not about the head. Even if the heads are not moving, even if the heads are stuck in politics or elections, it is up to the rest of the body to still, feed the body so that it stays alive. And it's a responsibility from each one of us that is here in this forum. And I guess you're here because you're interested in being part of that body.
Thank you, Guillermo. Calixto?
I think in order to make things work, you need to work with the people. That's the important part. The way we do it in the bank, we go to communities. We work with communities, with local businessmen, with local governments. And we get involved in what they're doing in one side or the other. And the other thing that you see is that, especially the border is very interesting because you normally think that the border it's where the country ends. Where the world ends. Yes.
It's kind of a flat and then nothing.
And actually, it's a region. It's a very vibrant region, and it's where things are happening in a binational relation. So by working with the people, as you were saying, well, the heads can be stuck in some things, but we need to continue working, and we need to continue involving people, and we need to keep working on the projects we are. There's still a lot to do, and he's one of the best critics from us. I mean, I know, and we're always talking about it, but yeah, to get more done.
Thank you, Calixto. And Dina, please.
Of course. I wanted to just build on what Gaston said about strategic alliances. I think that strategic alliances are very, very important, and we have to think out of the box. I mean, we always think, and again, why am I here? You wouldn't have thought about me being here. There's institutions like mine that are working towards, strengthening ties on both sides of the border, and that we don't know about. And that I think it's very important to learn about them, to learn what they're doing, as I say, to think out of the box. I think that a lot of things have already been tried and work or don't work as well. You were saying, why are things not working if the institutions are there, whatever. Well, maybe the time has come to be a little bit of disruptors and try to think differently. So I would encourage all of us to think along those lines and not to get stuck, in models and paradigms that, maybe worked a long time ago, but that are not working today in this very, very complex geopolitical environment we are all facing.
Thank you very much, Dina. I think we still have a couple of minutes for one, maybe two questions from the audience. Okay, I see hands there. Can we give them a microphone, please? It's coming. bueno, les presto este. Ah, perdón. Listo.
If institutions are run by people, what can we do to protect them from different political ideologies and to follow your analogy, Guillermo, to keep the blood flowing on the veins?
I think the starting point is fostering more conversations like this, fostering more spaces we can get together and work things out. I think the pandemic was a big gap, generated a big gap because we couldn't get as much as we would have liked. I mean, Zoom helps, but it's not. I think it is up to us, civil society, but also the business community to fund this type of opportunities, getting together in the academia, at the local level, because the only way is, again, to build that personal relationship and get to know the other person more closely and work things out together. So I would say, in order for prevent any blood clots, we have to have the opportunities to get together more often. And I think that's why the Fundación, the U.S. Mexico Foundation's platform is so amazing.
I'd like to add that there are two things that may be done. One is that institutions need to rise to the challenge and that they need to recognize that they're under threat. So this might be a motivation for people to do the things they need to do in a better way. That would be something that institutions can do towards themselves. But the other issue is that they need to recognize that they are besieged by populism around the world, and populism does not respect or does not give any value to institutions, or most institutions. Why? Because populism is a monopoly of power, and institutions in civil society especially are a sharing of power, are a sharing of authority, of a sharing of decision making. And it's a challenge between the future and the past, a vision of a future that is built on people and society working together with government, respecting the differences and building on common interests and common ground. And past saying these institutions are not working. And that's why government isn't working, because the responsibility of government has been disseminated amongst too many actors. So we need to get our power back into one area, which is government, and then we can do things right. So it's not a matter of being judging if it's okay or not, if it's right or wrong. It's just a difference of visions. And history has showed us that in general, populism has a clear and simple message, but a wrong answer to society. But I just stop there because I'm getting in trouble.
That's perfect. Thank you, Gaston.
I just may say,
of course.
I think one important thing, I mean, there's a variety of institutions. I mean, you have political, academic, and maybe more technical. And in the case for technical, I think the professionalization of the staff is really important. And to have a clear mandate and have clear people that's working on the levels of making things done. In that case, it doesn't matter what the head thinks, things will keep going.
Yeah.
If I may, we're talking about how difficult it is for him to get good talent, good human talent for the positions that are available in the bank. And again, this goes to the fact that in Mexico, many of the important institutions have a cap on salaries, have a cap on different things that are good for people to foster a career in public sector. So there are greater disincentives today than there were before. And that makes it even more difficult for people like you who are doing a good job to do a better job, because they can't get the people they need.
Thank you, Gaston. I think we have a second question. She had you had your hand up? No? Yeah, I saw your hand up. And also Consul Mendoza, and we'll close with that question.
Okay, thank you. I was wondering, at the end of the day, transparency is trust, and trust keeps things working. So, which are the strategies that are missing in order to improve or even really implement transparency in a binational way? Thank you.
I think you can speak to that question, Guillermo, because of the challenges we face into obtaining the information, and yeah, it goes and speaks right to trust.
So, yeah, I mean, transparency is a big issue on both sides of the border, but it not only applies to the MOUs and the things that I'm studying, but even also applies at the regulatory level. So I think one of the things that I found the most fascinating through this research is how often government officials used to sit down to try to come up with common standards, right? Common standards for developing, again, offshore drills in the Gulf of Mexico, common standards for cross-border challenges, common standards for the use of radio frequency. I mean, this is like very technical issues, but it's about sitting together and figuring things out. So we cannot change the transparency laws, but we can bring people together and try to come up with some common standards to make things easier for everybody to understand and work it through. So again, I think that's why that is so important to fund these kind of opportunities. And I would say another thing that, adding a little bit to Luke's last comment, I think one of the things that we're missing, that I would say in the last 25 years Mexico invested a lot, was in education, allowing Mexicans to go and do education abroad, right? Especially to the United States. There were a lot of programs, there was a lot of funding, and that really got cut off in the last 2 years. And I think that is starting to affect not only now, but the future generations, right? Because these are people that were able to go study abroad, learn about how things are done in the United States, network, they come back and they bring that knowledge and all that capital into the equation. But if you stop allowing people to move from one side of the border to the other and learn from each other, down the line that's going to have a greater impact. So I think that's one way of fostering more dialogues to harmonize things, regardless of transparency. But I can talk more about the transparency laws, but I don't want to get too technical.
But add that transparency is a value, a belief, and a pillar of democracy. And there's a lot of lip service around transparency and not too much real, where's the meat kind of thing. And it's very difficult to be really transparent because it's like being naked. And when you're in government and you're doing things and everybody's watching and seeing, they can see the things that you're not doing right. And you're more open to criticism. So it's not easy being transparent, even if you believe in it. So, but what can we do? We can still be pushing. We can be constantly pushing towards transparency as much as we can, especially in governments that are not democratic or that don't believe or don't have this as a value.
I'd like to add something to this point because I think we also have to discuss the meaning of transparency, because I think governments have understood, for example, when we talk about opening data, about just publishing the information. But as Guillermo was saying, we need to change the focus of the conversation from publishing the information, which is important so we can study the phenomena, to actually studying what's the effectiveness of that information. So I think that's critical, because having the information just in a transparent way is not enough. We need to have these first step, but then ask the question, what do we do with this? And what is it telling us? And what it's happening? So we can move forward and build trust. And I saw, Consul, you have the microphone. You have another question?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for Dina. I would like to talk about diasporas. The Mexican diaspora in the US is about 40 million people, Mexicans and Mexican Americans. They are the majority within the Latino community. They have a huge buying power. They are considered essential workers. We Mexicans are the first or second trade partner of the United States. There are millions of investments in the USA. But we don't have a national organization, a Mexican organization in the United States. On the other hand, the Jewish community and the Jewish issues are considered in the US as domestic issues. It doesn't happen with the Mexicans. I would like to know, in your opinion, what we Mexicans have been doing wrong. And the second one is, do you recommend us to build more institutions, more of these organizations, national organizations? We have the US Mexican Foundation, but it's one organization for our community. We need to support the nationals and the Mexican Americans, and we have to try to provide them with tools in order that they can thrive in the American economy.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, and thank you for your partnership. Juan Carlos has been a partner of ours for many, many years, and we've discussed this topic many times. It's a complex topic. I kind of spoke a little bit beforehand speaking about these political empowerment workshops that we organized with the Institute of Mexicans Abroad, which was, it's a great initiative, and was doing phenomenal work in really trying to organize somehow, or give some tools to Mexican Americans, mostly first generation, I have to say. And I think that, thinking about, how Mexican Americans can become a much more effective voice, political voice, because Mexican Americans have the clout, but they haven't been able to leverage it. And that's the difference, I think, between the Jewish community and the Mexican American community, that the Jewish community has been able to organize itself very effectively. The Jewish community has so many institutions, too many institutions, and we suffer from an excess of institutions and very effective institutions. But I think that, unfortunately, we haven't seen the Latino community in general and the Mexican American community in particular interested in foreign policy. Yes, they're interested in business, they're interested in that, but they're not interested in foreign policy, and foreign policy is quite important. I take the case of Israel. Israel in the United States is not a Jewish issue, it's an American issue. When people think about Israel, they think about the strategic relationship. Well, that's the way they have to think about Mexico. They don't have to think about Mexico. Of course, the Mexicans care about Mexico and Latinos care about it. No. Mexico is a strategic partner of the United States, and here is why. But you need an effective voice that can articulate the case. And as I've said, we're 40 million. If 1 million, 500,000 would organize effectively, we would be an incredible lobby in the United States. We haven't been able to do it. And I think that it has to do with the fact that we don't understand, and that's why, being part of both communities and both diasporas, I've tried to articulate the case, and I continue to articulate the case over and over of how, this is a very important issue. When NAFTA happened, I remember that an important group or an important voice was active in the United States advocating of Mexican Americans, and I think that it was the only time that I remember that Latinos really kind of like se aglutinaron around that issue and were really effectively advocating on behalf of that. But I haven't seen that again, and I think that the time has come, especially now. And instead of seeing this get more impetus, I see it less and less. And I don't know if it's COVID, which of course disrupted all of us. I don't know what happened, but I think that we cannot wait any longer. I agree with you 100%. As I said, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's models that exist out there that can inspire, that can be catalysts. And if we have the right partners, we can make it happen. It's just, being able to organize ourselves, and having the resources. We need also financial resources. If you don't have financial resources, you cannot do it. And the financial resources are there. But in terms of priorities, I don't see these being a priority, mostly. So hopefully, things will change, and, we will continue advocating for that, and hope that eventually it will happen, because I don't think we can wait any longer.
Dina, I'd like to build up on that question and ask you, how do we connect the dots to get started? Because I think this is a point of departure. We're having this conversation, we're all pumped up, and we will go out and say,
yeah, how do we get, you know, there's been instances, AMA, you know, the Association of Mexicans Abroad, and there's been several that I know have existed out there. We have to kind of take inventory, I think, of some of the voices that have been out there doing that, you know, and some of the resources that we can, you know, that could be of importance and use for this initiative, and you know, and maybe create some sort of steering committee, you know, that can start rethinking this, because it has been thought, but let's rethink about it, and let's start putting, you know, and connecting the different dots. As I said, there's been a lot of initiatives in the past, but they haven't been able to. But I think that we could definitely, you need a leadership voice. You need a voice and a leader that can start rallying the forces and identifying those who can make it happen. I think that the second, third generations, fourth generations of Mexican Americans are very important in this task. And I don't see them there. I don't see that Mexico is doing what it has to do to connect to those generations. They're connecting to the first. The U.S.-Mexico Foundation is doing it incredibly well, and really I commend you for that, and I'm very proud of the organization. But there has to be more organizations that are doing that, because we have lost a lot of our human resources of talent that could be part of this initiative.
Thank you, Dina. Guillermo, you wanted to mention?
To add a little bit on a positive note, I see a change of generation in the universities starting to happen. So I would say, when I talk to my Latinx students, the narrative is, my parents were ashamed of showing their Mexicanity, right? Especially in Texas. Like I mean, being openly a Mexican in Texas, it brings all the way back to the war, right? What happened to those communities and the Rangers. I mean, there's such awful stories back there. So for many years, the Tejanos wouldn't be proud of being called themselves Tejanos. But now there's a whole movement around the Latinx identity that is starting to rise, that we can capitalize on that. And I'll give you 2 action items in universities. I'm always surprised how few funded chairs for research on Mexico are in the key universities in the United States. The Chinese have done it, the Europeans have done it. You want to incentivize and you want to inspire future generations of Mexican Americans, have Latino professors in the classrooms. Show them that they can reach those positions, that they can bring the importance of this relationship. But if they go there and the only thing that academics talk about is the importance of Brexit and China and India, Mexico is not part of the picture. Mexico stopped funding chairs on those issues in the 1990s. You know, when NAFTA happened, there was a bunch of amazing scholars out there. After NAFTA happened, they tended to abandon the boat. Now we're starting to see more, right? There are certain centers in San Diego. There's the Texas-Mexico Center in SMU. But we need more of those in order for the future generations to see the importance of the relationship. Otherwise, they're just going to be looking at the other regions, because that's what they're being taught of. That the importance and the future of the United States is looking at what's happening in Europe, looking at what's happening in Asia. So we have to have a stronger presence. And I think the business community in that sense has an important role in coming and reaching out to the university, saying, how much do we need to put down to fund a chair that fosters the relationships in American universities? Because then from then on, you can talk to Mexican universities, you can bring more students, I mean, it has an amazing exponential power, but we haven't capitalized on that. So that's an action item, leaving it on a positive end.
I'm actually taking a lot of notes, because I think as we're working in the creation of this inventory of institutions, that should naturally lead to the creation of an inventory of these new voices that should become the North American way leaders. And we have one final question, and we'll be closing today from the audience.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations for you all for your wonderful presentations. My name is Javier Gonzalez from the Mexican think tank Ethos, and I have a very brief question perhaps to you, Gaston, because you mentioned that bilateral institutions are facing all sort of traditional challenges, but also new strategic and safety, you said, challenges. And I was thinking about global challenges such as disinformation or perhaps cybercrime or the threats that are coming from technologies to human rights, to what extent are these kind of problems on the agendas of these bilateral institutions?
Well, thank you for your question, Javier. I think we've got problems enough as it is, and you're adding several more. And I'm saying this because I don't think these particular issues are on the map of the binational institution. And I think you make a good point. They have to be. How can we or these institutions try to build a barrier against these threats? These threats are against societies and governments in general, and obviously these institutions are part of society and part of government. So whatever happens to a government or a society, ultimately, directly or indirectly, can harm our efforts. And to the point that, to the last question, I think that we should also add that these European and Chinese strategies maybe have to do with the fact that they are not neighbors with the States and Canada. And that's a great incentive for them to push their game up. And we've relied tremendously on just our geography. And we haven't done enough to compensate this issue. I think we also rely immensely, and I'm speaking in general terms of Mexico, on the fact that, the States are going to fix our problems sooner or later. The States are not going to let this happen, never. How long have you heard it, and how many times has the States tried to come in and solve any problems? And I don't say this as a criticism to Mexico or the States. The fact is that it's like people. Nobody else is going to solve our problems but us. Nobody else is going to solve the U.S.'s problems but the U.S., and same goes to Mexico. So I think this also has to be considered in the formula, and this has to wake us up and has to serve as an incentive to do the things that we need to do and get our behinds off these chairs and let's go.
Thank you, Gaston. We're almost out of time, but I want to please ask the audience to help me with a round of applause for our speakers. And also, I'd just like to encourage you all to connect with the speakers, to connect with each other. I think we're allies. We're trying to advance the North American way. This is the purpose of the forum. So we hope you enjoy the programming that is coming. And we hope you are also interested in learning more of the Centers for Binational Institutions work, what we're doing. We invite you to follow us on social media. And please come close if you wanna learn a little bit more of what we're doing. Thank you very much for the audience, also for joining us in this amazing conversation.